モントリオールのオリンピック目指してトレーニング中よ。そらもう一丁。
I mean, hey, just because he's a monster doesn't mean you can't have his ambitions. Welcome, everyone, to Himitsu Sentai Gorenger. Hi, welcome to a brand new series I'm starting. I'm sure you all know what this is about. This series is heavily inspired by Linkara's History of Power Rangers series, and just like with said series, I'll be watching, reviewing, and analyzing every season of Toei's Super Sentai and give my thoughts on each one. For the most part, this means a full recap of the franchise and its history. I'll be going over all the main shows from Gorenger to Kingoger and beyond, the movies if they're relevant, team-ups, and sometimes specials. The Super Sentai series is extremely long, so there will be some things I have to skip over. I won't be talking about anything relating to Kamen Rider unless it comes up, which, I mean, it will. But things like superhero Tyson movies will not be mentioned. I also won't be talking about any stage shows unless there's something really interesting to talk about. Keep in mind that this series will be entirely opinion-based, which means it's likely that you'll disagree with me on a lot of things. And that's fine. Just don't be a douche about it, and we're cool. It's also very possible that I will be wrong about certain things, or just forget to mention some stuff. I'm also not expecting this to go smoothly when it comes to copyright. Toei, the company that owns Super Sentai, is unforgivingly strict when it comes to using their copyrighted IPs in videos, to the point where many content creators have had their videos deleted or worse. I'm probably going to have a tough time with this because, in the words of Linkara himself,
I mean, if Toei could get History of Power Rangers taken down from YouTube, what the hell chance does reviewing the actual Sentai have?
I'm playing a dangerous game with the series, but one that I hope will pay off. For those who don't know, which, seeing as you're watching this video, I'm sure most of you do, but still, Super Sentai is a long-running Japanese tokusatsu series. The 16th entry, Kyoryu Sentai Gorenger, was adapted internationally in the form of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which spawned its own hyper-popular series that's also still running to this day. If you know what Sentai is, chances are that just like me, you were introduced to it through Power Rangers. Super Sentai has been running for damn near 50 years, and is, at the time of this recording, on its 47th series, Osama Sentai Kingoger, which is about to reach its ending. The first entry in Super Sentai, Himitsu Sentai Gorenger, aired from 1975 to 1977 and was created by prolific manga writer Shotaro Ishinomori, who also created Super Sentai's partner series, Kamen Rider, as well as other popular manga and anime like Cyborg 009. Ishinomori also worked with Toei to create other classic toku shows like Android Gokaiger, Inazuman, Ganbai Robocon, and Kaiketsu Zubat. Kamen Rider, however, was easily his biggest success. It was huge in Japan when it came out, and its success helped revitalize the tokusatsu genre, specifically superhero-based toku, kickstarting what is known as the Henshin boom of the 1970s. The show was already entering its 5th series, Kamen Rider Stronger, so Ishinomori was tasked with creating a new series. The show was originally pitched by Toei producer Toru Hirayama as being about a team of Kamen Riders, heroes with similar powers to Rider who could transform into colorful costumes to beat up rubber-suited monsters. Sound familiar? It was initially going to be called Red 1 and have more of a focus on just the Red Ranger, before they changed it to give the other characters their time to shine. Pretty ironic this was the original vision considering what they'll do in later seasons. In the original concept for Red 1, the heroes would have been referred to by the moniker Mask following their respective color. The name was eventually changed to Ranger as we know today. Ishinomori refined the concept to be about a team of normal humans who could transform into superheroes, rather than the cyborg motif his previous works had had. The show was also made into a much more of a spy thriller than a standard superhero show, due to the immense popularity the James Bond franchise was enjoying at the time. Toei got late writer Shozo Uehara to be the head writer on the show, a position he would keep for quite a while into the franchise. Himitsu Sentai Gorenger first aired on April 5th, 1975 on Net TV, later renamed TV Asahi, the exact same day as the first episode of Kamen Rider Stronger, and was met with massive success, running for 2 years and 84 episodes, being the longest Super Sentai series to date, before coming to an end on March 26, 1977. So, for the sake of moving on with this video, let's get right into it and take a look at Himitsu Sentai Gorenger. First episode of the show is titled The Crimson Sun, The Invincible Gorengers. Yes, every episode has 2 sentence-long titles, and they all have a color in them, be it crimson, red, blue, yellow, what have you. It begins with, well, the opening. It's okay. The thing about a lot of these early openings is that you can really tell when they're from. This song is certainly a product of its time, but it has its charm. It was sung by Isao Sasaki and Mitsuko Hori, and their voices go pretty well together. Ironically, I think the song is better nowadays because of how different it is from what we're used to. If you look at other tokusatsu openings from this time, including the original Kamen Rider opening, this song was actually pretty basic and generic back then. The episode begins in the various branches of the Earth Guard League, or EAGLE for short. Each branch is attacked by the villains of this show, the Black Cross Army, led by various generals that the Rangers will fight in the next few episodes. This is honestly a pretty badass entrance. They just show up, kill everyone, and leave. Though it is undercut by the fact that somehow they managed to leave exactly one sole survivor in each branch they attack. Although maybe that's on purpose, like they want at least one person to live through the event and suffer with the traumatic memories forever. It's either that or they're just really dumb. We cut to the Black Cross Army's base, where their leader is celebrating their successful attack. I'm sure the 5 people who survived can't possibly fight back against us. For the first half of this show, the Black Cross Führer is actually a pretty intimidating presence. His design is what sells it, just a mysterious man in a white cloak. We don't see his face until much later, but I honestly preferred keeping him hidden. Not showing his face gives him a much more menacing aura. The 5 survivors of the attacks are our heroes for the show, and as much as I'd like to save the character stuff for the end, a lot of these early Sentais from the 70s and 80s, much like the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, just don't have much in the way of character development or arcs, so for now I'll just talk about them right away. Our first Red Ranger is Tsuyoshi Kaijo, Aka Ranger. He was played by Naoya Makoto, and he's about as basic as it gets. He's pretty much the stoic leader archetype we've come to expect from a lot of Reds, which makes sense since he was the one who established that archetype in the first place. But he does have some interesting things going for him. Not only is he the only survivor of Black Cross's attack in episode 1, but one of the people who died in the attack was his brother. This is a pretty good story to work with. Or at least it would be, if it ever came up. Ever. Yeah, Tsuyoshi's brother never even gets a passing mention for the rest of this 84-episode show. I don't even know why they bothered putting it in there. You could say the reason he's so stoic and calm is because he doesn't want to let his emotions get in the way of protecting people, and to make sure he doesn't suffer a loss like that of his brother again, which is a cool concept, but it's also an idea I just came up with on my own, and the show itself never gets out of its way to communicate that to us. It could also have just been a mistranslation, since Tsuyoshi calls him Commander right before, but who knows. But hey, at least he's got something to do, unlike our next character. Akira Shinmei, Owl Ranger. He was the pilot, he used a bow and arrow, and that's about it. He had a pretty cool personality and a cool cowboy hat he wore all the time, but there wasn't much else to him. He was played by the great Hiroshi Miyauchi, who already had plenty of experience in the Toku field, playing the lead role in Kamen Rider V3. The problem is that he wasn't really there a lot of the time. The dude was busy with other roles at the same time, so the writers had to account for him not being around to film a lot. This meant that in some episodes, he only shows up in footage recorded afterwards of him piloting the plane, without any of the other actors around. He had a couple of really cool stunt scenes. I specifically remember the one where he was dangling like 100 feet above water on a crane, but as a character, he wasn't much, and he probably got the least amount of focus out of the whole team. He mostly just sat there looking cool and playing his guitar. He could get surprisingly hardcore sometimes, though. In episode 25, he literally tortures a monster for information by shooting its eyes with arrows one by one. Daita Oiwa was Key Ranger, and he was probably my favorite. He was the comic relief character. He was bold, he loved food, and he wasn't the smartest. His favorite food was curry, and he got captured constantly because of how gullible he was. On multiple occasions, the villains would just place a bowl of curry near him, and he would detransform and eat it, no questions asked. Makes you wonder why they never poisoned the thing. His character was really one note. That said, I still like him, quite a bit. Sure, he was just as one-dimensional as all the others, but I think what really sold him for me was just how genuine he felt. He always seemed like he was happy to be there. I really appreciated his presence. He was also the first character in Sentai to have a catchphrase that he would repeat in most episodes. Something that will come back to haunt us much later. He also served the purpose of pondering each episode's riddle. You see, there was this kid in the show named Taro who would make a riddle every episode that Daita would try to solve, to mixed results. Taro is a pretty superfluous character, and his constant nagging of Daita did get annoying sometimes, but I enjoyed the riddle idea and having something for the audience to participate in for every episode. Of course, these Japanese riddles translate about as well into English as you would expect, to the point where Rampage, the team that worked on subbing this show, had to put in little explanations for how these possibly make any sense. Of course, I can't go without mentioning that Daita's actor, Bakuha Takayama, tragically committed suicide only a year after the show ended. Suppose history has a way of repeating itself. Peggy Matsuyama is Momo Ranger, played by Lisa Komaki, and she's easily the best in this show. I don't even know why, she just gets way more focus than everyone else. She has the most focus episodes to her name, including the last one right before the finale, and she generally just had more to do. She was great at disarming bombs, and despite being number 4, she was pretty much always the one in charge when Tsuyoshi wasn't around to be. She had no qualms with kicking people's asses if she needed to either. However, just because she's the best character in the show, that doesn't mean she's particularly amazing when compared to later Pink Rangers in the series. But she was still pretty great, and I was surprised by how much focus she got. She also had the honor of wielding what is quite possibly the dumbest weapon in all of Sentai. It's literally just paper. We go from the best character in this show to the blandest one, Kenji Asuka, played by Yukio Ito. He wasn't bad, but he hardly got anything to work with. He still got more focus than Akira, but at least Akira had the advantage of being the cool guy with a bow and a sweet cowboy fashion sense, which made him more memorable. Kenji was the youngest of the team and had most of the tropes that come with that. He was impulsive, rash, constantly running into trouble without much thought, and I can only remember 2 of his focus episodes. He wasn't terrible, but he's the one I cared about the least. He did have my favorite weapon on the team, though, with his Mito Meringue. If only because we don't really get many boomerang weapons in this franchise, so that's neat. Our 5 survivors are recruited to become the Gorangers, and they each find messages while training, telling them to go to a restaurant called Snack Gone. What I find weird is that the episode doesn't actually show them getting their powers, it just cuts to them already training with them. Where do these powers come from? Who made them? How are they able to transform on the fly without using any kind of device? These questions never get answered, but nonetheless, they head to the restaurant where they all meet and head down to the basement. They come down and get their first mission from the disembodied voice that is their commander. Rescue a bus full of children locked inside a warehouse with a bomb. Gonpachi Edogawa is the owner of the Snack Gun restaurant and is later revealed to have been the voice of the Gorangers commander the whole time. And by later, I mean like 3 episodes later, so it's not much of a reveal. He was really uninteresting. He was the commander first and a character after, so there really wasn't much to him in terms of personality. He gave out the Gorangers missions and gave them strategic advice on how to complete those missions, and that was pretty much it. He had one pretty good episode where he was kidnapped by the Black Cross Army and had to come up with a plan to beat them himself. But otherwise, you could have just kept him as the voice in the monitor and barely anything about the show would have changed. The Rangers head to the warehouse using their motorcycles as well as their plane, the Varibloon, and discover that the place is locked, so they use the plane to pick up the bus with a claw and get it to safety, though they aren't able to save the building itself as the bomb still goes off. They chase down the one who orchestrated the attack, Gold Mask, the very first monster of the week in Sentai history. He's also the first character in all of Sentai to wear spandex, as the Rangers wouldn't begin wearing spandex suits until a later season. It's a pretty cool action set piece where Tsuyoshi chases Gold Mask's truck on his motorcycle while the foot soldiers called Zolders throw bombs at him. Speaking of which, the foot soldiers are pretty cool looking. They're pretty much just guys in black suits, but what really strikes me is the fact that they look like real people. The Black Cross Army is presented in this show as a cult of sorts. Sure, it's eventually revealed that the Black Cross Führer is actually an alien, but it's always implied that these aren't just alien/robot foot soldiers like we'll get in later seasons, but real living people with their own lives and families who have been brainwashed to be part of this cult. It also doesn't help that their faces almost remind me of 60s Cybermen designs from Doctor Who, although some of this eeriness is undermined when you hear what they sound like. Anyways, the Rangers manage to catch up to Gold Mask and transform, becoming the Go Rangers. I have to say, this is a pretty lackluster first roll call. There's nothing wrong with the roll call itself, simply yelling the names of each ranger and concluding with a team name, but this scene in particular feels really off. I think it's the lack of music while the Rangers are introducing themselves. The scene of our heroes finally getting a fighting chance against the villains who took so much from them doesn't feel as triumphant as it should because they wait until after the roll call is done to start playing any music. So there's just this awkward silence during the whole scene. Now let's talk about the suits. They really show their age. These suits are not form-fitting at all, the helmets are big and bulky, the cloth gets dirty super easily, the visors are bulging out of the helmets, and the V-shaped stripes on their chests look like they're just about to come off. Speaking of those stripes, they serve to indicate rank, something we'll see more of in future series. And this means the bigger the number, the more stripes there are, and it looks fine on Aqua Ranger, but the more you go along, the uglier it gets, until you get to Mito Ranger's suit, and oh boy. On the topic of Mito Ranger, one thing that always irked me is that his helmet is a different shade of green from the rest of his suit, and it's very noticeable in certain scenes. He also has the weirdest looking visor, as well as the most stripes on his chest, so really his suit is easily the ugliest one. Another thing to note is that they each have numbers on their helmets to indicate rank. But for some reason, Aqua Ranger's 1 has a different design compared to everyone else's. I mean, I get it, the number 1 is meant to be special, but it just makes the helmets really inconsistent, and makes everyone else's look cheap by comparison. It also doesn't help that Aqua Ranger and Momo Ranger are the only ones with white gloves and colored visors, while everyone else has the standard black. I feel like we should take into account that these suits are adapted from Ishinomori's manga design for the Go Rangers. Maybe. The manga did release about a month after the show, but either way, Ishinomori was the one who created these suits, so we shouldn't ignore his version. The helmets here look much more appealing to look at because they're drawn on paper and don't have budget limitations. I am glad they didn't include the giant white stripes, though. These look terrible. There's actually some early promotional pictures of the show where the suits look slightly different, and am I the only one who kind of prefers these? Aquaranger's black visor looks much better than the blue we ended up with, and actually matches with the rest of the team, barring Momo. The material of the suits also looks much nicer than the easily dirtied cloth we ended up with, although it probably would have been more difficult to move around in. Also, shout out to the absolutely giant capes. There's no way these would have been practical for fight scenes, so I'm glad they made them smaller, but part of me still wishes they had gone with this design. It's so goofy and looks like it was ripped straight out of a manga page. Despite all their issues, I still like these suits. They definitely don't hold up, but there's something oddly charming about them. Watching these suits in action really made me feel like a child in 70s Japan, when this was the standard of quality for kids' TV. I also like how their visors are shaped like their individual weapons, and they have to remove part of it to summon said weapons. Although I do wonder how that works. Do they just have two visors in there? How do they see through two layers of that? We get our first fight scene, and yeah, it kinda sucks. It's slow, sloppy, and it feels like they barely choreographed it. It is enjoyable from a historical perspective, but it definitely hasn't aged well. They use their finishing move, the Gorenger Storm, where they just kick a ball around to each member before kicking it to the enemy where it explodes. It's pretty unimpressive, but hey, it's 1975, so what can you do? You know, maybe we should double check to make sure they were all dead last time. The ending theme for this show is really fun. It's similar to the opening and how of its time it is, but this one is a lot more interesting. It's much bouncier and more energetic than the opening. It's sung once again by Isao Sasaki, and his voice is very boisterous, so it gives the song a sense of grandeur, like an anthem of sorts. It's a very old school style, but I really like it. On the topic of Isao Sasaki, can we talk about this absolute legend? He is 81 years old, and to this day, he's still performing in live shows and singing the Gorenger songs. Speaking of the music, the soundtrack for this show is composed by the late Shumei Watanabe, who also composed the soundtracks for the next few entries in the series. He also composed the music for a lot of other tokusatsu shows from the 70s to 80s, as well as tons of other Japanese media. He's a pretty big deal is what I mean. As for his work on Gorenger, it's not a bad score by any means, and a lot of the tracks are pretty memorable. Watanabe's scoring will become much better as his run on the series goes on, but for now, the tracks we have here are already pretty good. I must say though, this soundtrack screams 70s with all the brass instruments and drums. It gives these early Sentai shows a unique identity, which I'd argue is exactly what a good composer for media should do. Overall, this is a pretty good first episode, not just for this show, but for the franchise as a whole. It gives us a great first impression of the characters and their personalities, as well as the villains we'll be fighting for the rest of the show. It also establishes right off the bat the tone that this show is going to have, at least for now. For the first episode in all of Sentai, not too shabby. Episodes 2 through 5 see the Rangers defeating the individual members of Black Cross that caused the massacres in their respective branches. Episode 3 is when we finally get the revelation that the curry shop owner is actually their commander. Episode 7 marks the first appearance of the Goranger's gun, the Silver Shot. It's a tranquilizer gun, which is honestly pretty cool. In Episode 9, the Goranger Storm gets updated. Instead of just the generic silver ball, it actually changes color to match each Ranger and becomes spiky for the finishing blow. From this point on, the show becomes a lot more episodic. You know the drill, monster of the week, yada yada. The show is technically split into arcs, each ending with the Gorangers defeating a general of the Black Cross Army. Each general gets more and more powerful and takes more episodes to defeat. This episodic nature is pretty normal for any other season of Sentai, but Goranger is a lot longer than usual. With 84 episodes as opposed to the average 45 to 50 episodes a Sentai normally gets, you'd think this would mean that more things actually happen in this show compared to a normal Sentai, but no. Goranger's longer runtime is just filler. You could skip most of this show and not miss a thing. Out of these 84 episodes, only about 30 of them are actually important to the plot. Everything else is skippable filler. Again, this usually wouldn't be a problem because 30 episodes makes up more than half of your average Sentai length, but Goranger is considerably longer when it really didn't need to be. This isn't the show's fault, of course. This was a 70s superhero show that aired every week. It wasn't meant to be kept up with. This is the type of show where you could just turn on any random episode and still understand everything perfectly. Telling a continuous story was not what was on the mind of the producers, I get it, but it makes binging the show nowadays a bit of a slog. For the next 20 episodes or so, we have a pretty consistent status quo. The Black Cross Army will come up with a plan, the Gorangers will stop it. Eventually, they fight against whoever the current general is and defeat them, where a new general takes the lead. Throughout this, the Rangers get plenty of upgrades such as new weapons and new vehicles. Episodes 22 and 23 mark the first two-parter in Sentai history, which is neat. Episode 37 reveals the Führer's true form as an alien, and as I said before, I preferred the mysterious cloaked look. One thing I noticed was how much the show changes in tone over time. As the episodes go on, everything starts getting much sillier. In episode 43, the Rangers get a new finisher called the Gorenger Hurricane, which is shaped like an American football and or rocket, and is a lot more colorful than the plain soccer ball of the Gorenger Storm. Instead of just exploding, the Gorenger Hurricane takes the form of an object relating to the episode, which often results in much more comedic monster deaths. Remember how I mentioned the Gorengers had a plane? It's called the Varibloon, and it gets destroyed in episode 42 to be replaced by a new, more colorful, bird-shaped plane called the Varidreen. Another thing that got progressively stupider were the monster designs. Every monster in this show is named Mask, and they each have their own motif. Pretty standard stuff, but there's a noticeable difference between the monsters early on and the ones we get later. Early monsters include the likes of Gold Mask from the first episode, Warrior Mask, a samurai who kills people with a sword, Poison Gas Mask, a pretty self-explanatory, Witch Mask, who can create illusions, and Skull Mask, who has a giant staff that looks like a ribcage. All of these monsters have pretty intimidating designs. I'm sure Skull Mask gave some poor kid in the 70s nightmares. Now let's look at some monsters from later in the show. Locomotive Mask, who's just a giant train. Gunman Mask.
Oh no, a gunman!
Oh, I'm gonna stab you.
Piano Mask. And of course, how could I forget the iconic Baseball Mask, whose head is just a giant baseball with angry eyes. Baseball Mask is the most popular Gorenger monster, as evidenced by the fact that he's always the one who manages to return in some form for every anniversary celebration. Not the Black Cross Führer, not any of the generals, Baseball Mask. On the topic of Baseball Mask, shortly after the episode in which he appears, another important thing happens. You see, Bakuha Takayama, who played Daita, had to temporarily leave the show to focus on a play he was working on. So, the writers decided to replace him as Kyuranger with another character, Taigoro Kumano, played by Jiro Daruma. He was pretty much a carbon copy of Daita, but with minor differences. For one, he liked fishing, and he was generally much calmer than Daita. He did have one pretty funny moment where Taro tried to get him to do a riddle, and Daigoro basically told him to shut the hell up. It's also during his run that we got the very first official Super Sentai movie. There had technically been movies before, but they were just TV episodes played in theaters. This was the first actual movie production in the franchise. It's not very remarkable, being pretty much just an episode of the show with a higher budget. Actually, that's how most Sentai movies feel, to be honest. Daigoro was only there for 12 episodes until Takayama returned and they brought Daita back. They wrote Daigoro out of the show in episode 67, Crimson Special Attack, Kyuranger Dies at Sunset, by killing him off, as the title suggests, giving us our very first Ranger death in Sentai history. It's a pretty well done death scene, too, though it is undercut by Daita coming back to take his spot as Kyuranger like a few minutes after, only for Daigoro to be completely forgotten about and never mentioned again for the rest of the show. Daita's return, however, does lead to probably the best fight scene in this entire show. For the first time in 67 episodes, it feels like they actually tried to choreograph this thing. Probably because it is the first time. This episode was the first time the stunt work in Sentai was done by the Japan Action Club. It took them 67 episodes, but this show finally has proper action direction and choreography. In episode 65, we get a new ending theme, the first of only 2 times the ending in a Sentai has ever been swapped midway through. I like it, but it's not nearly as good as the first one. This one is also sung by Isa Sasaki, as well as some neat little backing vocals yelling out each ranger's name. Again, it's a pretty good song, but it doesn't hold a candle to the original one. Fun fact, the lyrics to both this ending theme and the opening were written by Shotaro Shinomori himself. Episode 69 introduces us to this goofy thing, the Vari Kikyun. It's a hot air balloon. It looks really stupid, and I love it. Episode 83 is the second to last episode of the show, and, as stated earlier, is a Peggy-focused episode. In this episode, an Eagle X officer who was thought to have been killed during the attacks in episode 1, and who Peggy had a crush on, turns out to have been kidnapped and made to work for Black Cross, and Peggy has to kill him. This is a neat way to tie into the finale, having something that happened in episode 1 finally come up again. It's also a pretty threatening plan by the villains. Overall, the villains in this show are pretty competent for the most part. Not only did they successfully manage to kill one of the Rangers, but they knew the Rangers' secret identities, so they often used that knowledge against them. A lot of their plans involved the Rangers' personal lives. They actually kidnapped the Rangers on multiple occasions, and even managed to brainwash Peggy herself in one episode. Man, Peggy went through a lot of crap in this show. Unfortunately, all of this competence and level-headedness goes completely down the drain when it comes to the final episode. It's revealed in this episode that the Black Cross Führer has a very specific weakness due to his nature as an alien. he decides that on this exact day, where his weakness is fully exposed and he is at his most vulnerable, that he suddenly wants to go fight the Gorangers himself for the first time in the entire show. He meets with the Gorangers, and to be fair, he puts up a pretty good fight, blocking a lot of their attacks and pretty much being immortal for a lot of it. But then he decides to literally tell Tsuyoshi his weak point, where he tells the other Rangers and they destroy him and the rest of the organization. That's how this show ends. The main villain, the leader of this organization that has been slowly taking over the world from the shadows, decides that he wants to put himself in mortal danger on the one day he's likely to be defeated. After 84 episodes, this is how it all concludes. Underwhelming isn't even close to the right word to describe this. Despite that train wreck of an ending, I still enjoyed my time with this show. It certainly wasn't great, but it was a fun, campy 70s toku romp. I came into this show with very low expectations and was pleasantly surprised. 84 episodes may have been a bit too much, though. I feel like you could cut a lot of this show out and really not miss anything. And having to go through all of that just for that finale is not worth it in the slightest. Seeing as this was the first Sentai, a lot of the tropes we've come to expect from the series, such as giant robots and power-ups, aren't present here, and honestly, I don't mind it. It was nice not having to sit through a mech battle every episode. It gave us more time for cool undercover spy scenes. Yeah, this show has a lot more spy action than any other toku. Tons of scenes of the Rangers sneaking around, disguising themselves, and infiltrating enemy bases. Tsuyoshi specifically had plenty of episodes where he had to sneak into Black Cross Army headquarters to stop their plans. It was really cool. I would never recommend this show as anyone's first Sentai, or even as a casual show to watch, however. This show is best enjoyed if you know exactly what you're getting into. It's kind of like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in that regard, except with even less of the story. The reason Mighty Morphin got so popular was because the kids enjoyed the brainless action and cool fight scenes. In the same way, audiences in the 70s enjoyed Gorenger for its cool spy action, fun characters, and threatening monsters. And I know I'm right, because Himitsu Sentai Gorenger was a massive success, being to this day the highest rated Sentai. Yeah, you heard me. No Sentai has been as much of a runaway hit as this. This show was huge, to the point where Toei yet again came to Ishinomori to make a follow-up series in hopes of recapturing that lightning in a bottle. This new show would be very different from Gorenger while still keeping the same tone. Join me next time as we see if Toei played their cards right with Jaku Dengekitai.
Saraba Gorenger! Gorenger! Gorenger!
This one is also sung by Isao Sasaki, as well as some neat little backing vocals. Backing vocals? Alright.